And I welcome the opportunity to participate in this debate. And I note the Taoiseach's speech, and I have praised the Taoiseach for showing leadership. And I'm going to actually restrict my praise at this point because I've just read his whole speech and he's given us an outline of what happened with the 27 member states and how they couldn't reach unity, and which highlights really the importance of us making our voice heard. But he goes on to utterly condemn Hamas for its brutal and provocative terrorist attack, which we all agree with, absolutely condemn that. But he goes on to say, I've been equally clear that Israel's response must be in line with international humanitarian law, and this means it must be proportionate. It is not in compliance with international human law, and it is not proportionate. And there is no condemnation of that. So if we're going to have credibility in the world as a neutral state, then we must have consistency. And if there is no condemnation of what is openly a genocidal approach to Gaza, genocidal killing, then we're going to lose our credibility, Minister, and I'm most unhappy about that, because our strength is in our neutrality and being able to speak truth to power. And he goes on to sympathise with those who have lost lives, not in Gaza, mind you, so it's important to read the speech. He goes on to extend his condolences to the family and friends of the heroic UN and other aid workers that have been killed and so on, and I absolutely accept that. But what's lacking is extending sympathy to the people who have died in Gaza. And let's just give the figures again for the record, and I really feel uncomfortable giving figures in this manner when we're talking about human beings and children. Over 10,328 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza in 1 month and 1 day, including 4,200 children, boys and girls, 631 elderly and 2,600 women. More than 2/3 of Palestinians killed are children and women. That's not a defensive army. You couldn't possibly call the army defence forces in Israel. That's a warmongering, vengeful army that's out of control, and that we need to call it out for what it is. We've lost 89 UNRWA staff and 37 journalists and media. And that has been done by Israel, who are going in to destroy Hamas, and in doing so, they're destroying the Gazan, the Palestinian people. Now, I don't know how we can hedge our bets on that. I don't know how we can use nuanced languages. Genocide is genocide. Murder of children is utterly wrong and unacceptable against all international law. Let's call that and let's condemn it if we're going to have credibility. During his speech, he pointed out about the war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. He had no nuanced language there. Very clear condemnation. Now, Minister, how can we do that on the one hand and stand idly by, other than showing concern and horror, which he has shown, horror at the death, without condemning it? Yeah. And you know, we're here today, and it's time to put it in context. The action by Hamas, which I utterly condemn without reservation, did not happen in a vacuum. That's been repeatedly pointed out by various courageous people, no later than today in the Irish Times by a former diplomat, who was clearly pointed out that this attack, while condemning it, did not happen in a vacuum. I apologise for any confusion earlier on if it was on my part. I want to try and stick to questions in relation to this. And the first question is, what is the magical number of deaths in Gaza and in Palestine before we actually call for an immediate ceasefire and before we condemn what Israel is doing? Because we haven't actually condemned it at all. We keep talking that it should be in compliance with humanitarian law. It should be proportionate. It clearly is not. So can you please tell me what is the magical number? Equally, what is the position in relation to Shannon? What inspections have been carried out in relation to the arms going through Shannon? by America and other countries. The Human Rights Watch has verified Israel's use of white phosphorus munitions in Lebanon and Gaza, clearly a violation of international humanitarian law. So can you update us, please, on what inspections, what actions have been taken by the government in relation to Gaza? In relation to allowing trucks through, at the very least, prior to this war, prior to this attack by Hamas and the absolute warmongering by Israel in response, 80% of the people in the Gaza Strip were utterly reliant on goods and food coming in from outside. I understand the figure is something up to 500 trucks per day. And now we are actually happy that 500 trucks have gone in total since this started. What voice are we using in relation to that? What voice are we using in relation to the deaths and the destruction that's been perpetuated in the name of democracy, in the name of self-defence, which is turning language on its head? And parallel with that, the dehumanised language that's been used to describe the Palestinian people. And I won't do them the indignity of repeating that appalling language. But could you please tell me where the government, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, has dealt with that, please? Thank you. Sorry, I beg your pardon. My final question was in relation to the UN and the special procedure. I apologise. The special procedure that's there when the veto is misused, as it has been misused by Russia in the past, by America on numerous occasions, and particularly since this war has begun. There's a special procedure there called Initiative for the Uniting for Peace Initiative, in accordance with Resolution 377 of the 3rd of February 1950, to call for an emergency session of the General Assembly to discuss a permanent and sustainable ceasefire and the lifting of the blockade on Gaza. And finally, I understand 120 countries in the General Assembly have called for peace. If that's not an overwhelming majority, I don't know what is.